Protests at the main Foxconn factory in China are intensifying. The unverified footage doing the rounds on social media is alarming. People wielding sticks, smashing surveillance cameras and windows at the massive campus of the Apple supplier. Guards chasing demonstrators. After months of strict COVID-19 controls and weeks of a closed-loop production system cut off from the outside, the final straw for hundreds of workers was said to be a delay in pay. Some staff complain of being bunked up with colleagues who tested positive. Shares of Foxconn have slipped by 2% since the unrest emerged in late October. Foxconn accounts for 70% of iPhone shipments globally. The disruptions may shift some iPhone sales from the key holiday period into the March quarter. Well, let's bring in Jens Korte, our financial correspondent in New York. How bad is this hitting Apple's bottom line?
Well, I mean, overall, more than 200,000 people are working in that Foxconn factory, and it must be really tough. I mean, already a couple of weeks ago, when there were some shutdowns due to COVID, workers were only allowed to move between basically where they sleep and where they work. What we do hear from Foxconn so far is that operations are running normally. A couple of weeks ago, when we had those COVID cases, there were some estimates that Apple might produce a few million iPhones less than originally expected. And to pin that down, about 4/5 of the iPhone 14 models are built in that factory. But at least when you look at the stock price, there was not a huge reaction here on Wall Street regarding Apple stocks.
Now, Apple is said to be looking at pulling out of China to a certain extent. How far are they with those plans?
Ben, that is the big trend, that you try to be not too dependent from one facility or one area. That is not just true for Apple, but also for that company. Already a couple of months ago, Apple did start to produce some of the iPhone 14s in India. But to really get less dependent on this factory in China will take some time. So there are already some steps underway, but you can't change that or switch that from one day to another. We've also seen that more and more suppliers actually are moving their operation not just somewhere else in Asia, but also more towards the United States. So it is a clear trend, but it will take time for those changes to really have an impact.
Jens Korte, thank you very much. Coordinated employee action is pretty rare in China, perhaps partly because the alternative to sitting around unemployed is to enter an oversaturated jobs market. Young, talented Chinese graduates are competing hard for very few roles.
Liu Zhengzhou studied tourism, but for half a year, he searched for a job in vain. He's not alone. Among young adults in China's big cities, 1 in 5 is currently unemployed. Now, Zhengzhou works in a fantasy board game shop, but he doesn't earn very much money. Due to COVID-19, and especially because of the strict hygiene measures, the job really only pays the bare minimum. Liu Zhengzhou lives in his grandmother's apartment, so he's able to make ends meet even with very little income. He hopes to improve his chances with another degree. Many of us wanted to go to work after we finished our bachelor's degree, but because there are no jobs, we're continuing our studies. It's ingrained in the social consciousness. People have to study in order to get good jobs. But as a result, the number of people continuing their studies after school has risen sharply in recent decades. In 2010, only 24% of a cohort went on to university. Compare that to the current figure, which is at 58%. Now there's a supply and demand problem. Too many well-educated people for higher-paying careers. Professor Xiang Biao researches China's young adults at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Graduates live in a vicious circle of competition.
It basically means that you put more and more effort endlessly. And it's a very tiring process, but with no real meaning. And often it refers to a situation that you are forced, pressurized to participate in competition without any end in sight.
Due to poor job opportunities, many are turning to further study, even if it leads to overqualification. A business model is evolving from the energy of these young adults. Similar to co-working offices, some are starting to book desks for studying by the hour. Yu Zhenming spends 20 hours a week hitting the books. He already has a master's degree in civil law, but because his job is on the line, he wants to improve his odds with another degree. Exam systems are one of the few systems that are fair. As long as you put in enough work into studying, you'll be rewarded accordingly with good grades. It's more direct, easier, and fairer than most things in our lives, like work. Studies show that fear is the dominant feeling for this generation. For decades, steady growth gave everyone a sense of opportunity. But the current gloomy economic figures are now hitting the younger generation.